You're watching Face to Face, and I am, and I say this every week, but this is especially a pleasure to be joined by Jacob Vince, who is the Chief Executive of Christian Friends of Israel, UK, otherwise known as my older brother, another one. It's great to see you, Jake. I know I've always called you Jake, like I was always called Timmy. Stop complaining, Timmy, as we grew up. But no, you have, there's a unique feature of me interviewing you in that you're the only one I've ever interviewed who could say he remembers the day I was born. Don't know whether you even want to talk about that, but something happened.
Well,
Christmas Day.
It was on Christmas Day, and we were all farmed out to aunts and uncles. So that was quite a dramatic thing. I think I would have been about 4 or 5, I think 5 probably. And I do remember somehow you coming round to where I was staying. I don't think I'd ever stayed anywhere else but with my family before then. And remember the baby and Granddad used to always put what was then I think a shilling or maybe whatever, a florin probably, into the hand for the baby to grasp. I do remember you did manage to grasp it.
Oh, that's good. No, that's good. Yeah. Thank you very much. So that was my first achievement in life.
Perhaps so.
Yeah, get a grip. And so, Jake, we had a fairly strong Christian upbringing. But just highlight something that triggered your Christian faith, and then we'll talk about the ministry years, so to speak.
Well, both Mum and Dad were first-generation Christians, so in one sense they were fairly idealistic for their family. I was the eldest son, had an older sister, and Dad had come to faith in the forces and then spent time at All Nations Bible College, and I think then was a pastor on a couple of pastorates, and then eventually went into the family, the father's family construction business. But so he was always very keen to make sure that we were brought up in the faith. And but going to school, I had quite a vivid imagination, and I the kind of fairy story, children's stories, which included sort of witches and things like that, and sort of mixed with possibly something I must have heard about the bottomless pit. And I was only about 5 or 6 I think, and I was having sort of bad dreams, and so therefore then I went down at one time to see Dad in his study. They had studies in those days, and he quietly led me to the Lord. With 2 scripture, which one was "Behold, I stand at the door and knock," was probably taken slightly out of context, and the other one was "God is my strength and song; He's become my salvation." So, and I've spoken to 6-year-olds since, and yes, they're capable of making that profession of faith as I did then. Obviously, it's a journey. It's a narrow gate to enter, but it's a narrow road to stay on, and finding you keeping on that road and growing and learning. I think the other thing was that he. My next brother to me, we both said you need to read one of the Gospels, and mine was Luke. And actually I've had an affinity with Luke ever since. It's a very well thought through, well ordered book, which links of course with Acts, which is something which I've thought about much more and always read them together now. I think my brother had John, but that was something, getting into reading the Bible. And to be fair, I couldn't always make it out, and of course it would have been the King James authorized version at the time. And I always struggled with spelling ever since because of the these and thous, never quite sure where to put them. But I do remember going down to see Dad once, because if there were any questions, come and see me. And I said, "What's this word earnestness?" And I couldn't work out what it didn't seem to make sense. And he actually got quite annoyed with me and said there was a right hyphen earnestness on the next page. That was righteousness. So I didn't actually ask him too many questions after that, and had to work it out for myself.
Absolute classic. Now I can say from my memory that I remember Jake playing his guitar, and you composed, which I still have in my head. You may have forgotten them long since, but some of your songs that you wrote, and they were, I thought, brilliant and biblical. One was, "Oh Lord, it is you who has made the heavens and the earth and the sea," and it just rolled so beautifully. There were many others.
Yeah.
But so you're quite a creative guy. That's the point.
I guess so. Yeah. And I've because I like the scriptures, and we grew up with kind of scripture in song, although some of it again was the authorized version. I found that when I was looking to learn scripture, that often, particularly actually in the NIV, it's quite poetic. There's some sections in poetry, and I found myself word for word being able to put music and just seeing the pattern because of that in the Bible on a whole number of songs, which I'd love to do more with, but time doesn't always allow it.
I've got to make time. And so I won't tell your story, but how did you come to be involved in eventually running Christian Friends of Israel here in the UK?
Okay.
What's your journey, your pathway?
Well, pathway I think was that the church that we went to, the lead elder happened to develop, I suppose, a little bit of interest in Israel, but perhaps focused around the Garden Tomb, and but then found himself in Israel during the Yom Kippur War. So I would have been, that's 73, so I would have been 13 then. And so this was quite a big thing, and we're praying for our, elder who's here in the Yom Kippur. Later on, he wrote a book called Battle for Israel. So it was one of the early books that I read, and along with 10 Fingers for God and God, I think Torture for Christ. And I never wanted to be tortured for Christ after I'd read that, I can assure you.
Also Amy Carmichael, that was always
they were those were the kind of
Donovan
books.
Fellowship.
Yeah. Anyway, so that was one of the books that I read. Because he'd written that book, I think people used to come through the church that were related to Israel. I developed an interest in that, and eventually. Someone who was organising, by that stage I was coming into my late teens, and I had the opportunity to go out on a kibbutz in Israel with a group that called Project Kibbutz, and I spent a year over there doing a kind of discipleship training program, which was similar to the kind of thing that YWAM were doing at the time, and linked around navigators. So I was doing verse memory, which was also a good thing. Of course, if I couldn't remember the verse, I then had to put music to it to learn it. And so that was, it was a secular kibbutz, but I was part of a Christian group, and I learned there. It was international but American based. But I learned there to get on with Christians from all walks of life. Some of them I didn't have anything much in common apart from that we were Christians. It wasn't easy, but it was a good lesson to learn, because we tend to pick our Christian friends, and actually we need to find how we can blend out from that. Then later on, I had an opportunity to go out again to work in Jerusalem. Once you start on this kind of journey, my academic education happened quite a bit later, but it was a good experience. I lived in Jerusalem, just overlooking the old city.
I used to run around the old.
Yeah, I used to go for my daily run around the old city. So
we're talking about now the early 1980s, late 1970s?
About 81 to 83. I was there for about a year and a half.
Okay, yeah. Wow.
And linked in a little bit with Christchurch later on.
So that was a significant time with the Lebanon War. The first Lebanon War with Sharon.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, when I first came out, it was really a very good period when we had the peace agreement, with Sadat and Begin, the Camp David agreement. Then yes, there was the issue with what's happening in the Lebanon, and that's when things started to be. And prior to that, we'd had the raid on Entebbe and other things like that, which have been great successes. Israel was the kind of plucky nation. But I think the Lebanon War was one that started to turn the narrative much more. It was much open and free. I was able to go through to Ramallah. There was an Anglican convent school there. Going down to Hebron, all of it was open at the time. And to the glass
and the
bay,
Sinai.
The integration. I was able to go down to the Sinai
because although they'd had the Camp David agreement,
the Sinai was still available. So we went down to the Sinai, to Santa Caterina Monastery at the time. So these were very good days. Of course, then I didn't actually go back to Israel until actually I went with you on a tour during the Second Intifada. And at that point, that's when I really started to re-engage. It's always been there in the background. I always felt Israel had a place, within my understanding. But actually, that was the time when I started to really engage with the subject and read widely, right across the board, from different perspectives, from the Christian a Palestinianist perspective, I could use that from others, and some other writers.
Because you
on
came,
theology.
we used to do the church leaders tours, which you then took on,
That's
you know,
right.
and we're talking about bishops and leaders of denominations and the like. But part of the ethos of those tours, and the one that you first came on, was to meet the patriarchs, meet the Orthodox Christians and the Palestinian leaders, as well as the Israelis.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's actually quite helpful to do. It's a unique privilege to be able to do that, to have gone to places which others haven't been able to, or wouldn't think to do so. So the first one we did was which we did was this. That was later on. After I'd actually just started at Christian Friends of Israel. But the first tour we did was very much trying to find the reconciliation aspects. But the feedback was, no, we want to hear some of the extremes.
Yeah.
So then we already were meeting with the Palestinian Authority, but we hadn't really met with the, what would be referred to as the settlement movement. So we actually met with both different parties. What was most interesting is they both expected, because we turned up to see them, that we agreed with them.
Yes.
And we should go back and tell everyone about it. Both sides thought that, because not many people hear from both sides. And that's been most helpful to me in the discussions that I have today with the wider church public at the Christian festival, things like that we do there, because I've been there and I know these stories.
Exactly, and dare I say, we won't major on it because it's another enormous subject, but also as a member of Synod for how many years, and the church commissioner. So you're known for the work you do as a friend of Israel, and you're there in another wide church context.
I seem to find myself in challenging environments in some form or another.
Oh no, we're the ultimate outsiders, Jake. Don't worry about it.
Well, that's what I don't feel that we should be necessarily outsiders. We should be we should be the mainstream. And that's what I feel. I feel that the message we've got of the scriptures and the understanding of that should be front and center. But I'm very keen on making sure we draw from the Bible as fully as we can, and there's certain conventions. You talk about the Jewish people that maybe have, or the Orthodox Jews that might have traditions. The church has got conventions, and some of those we need to find out how we can improve them. We're not going to change 2,000 years of history, but at least if we're
although they're trying in another direction.
Well, of course, that's the challenge. But I think if we, I think to revisit, and there's so many more opportunities to do so, how the Bible is structured. We've got the Dead Sea Scrolls, so we can see some of these things, and there is actually a bit more integration, even theologically, between the Jewish schools of thought and Christian schools of thought. The question is, where does it go from there?
Yeah, very good.
So
Jake.
I'm very keen.
I'm glad you mentioned about a structure and the like, because I remember a visit to your home in Eastbourne where you first sort of unveiled your charts, and I loved it because, and you could have kept me going all nights on it, because I've also visited the Bible Museum in Washington, a Museum of the Bible, where there was a little sort of plaque talking about this. But so I felt a little bit informed on the subject. But just tell us why it's important and how it can help, because of course we know our 66 books of the Bible, set out in a certain form, but it's not chronological necessarily, or thematic. So
First of all, I think probably I first came across a different order for what's referred to as the Old Testament through David Paulson unlocking the Bible, but then he doesn't develop that any further. And then I came across a guy called Roger Beckwith, who was an advisor to one of the groups we had on General Synod, who wrote the Old Testament canon of the New Testament Church based on the Jewish order, to show that all the scriptures that of what we call the Old Testament were in place by the time Jesus came. But the order was the Jewish order. And I have to say, that is the order that absolutely works in terms of understanding the logic of the scriptures. So essentially, you've got the law, and it's the order that Jesus was using, the law, the prophets, and the Psalms. Luke writes about it, and then in Acts, they gave themselves to the apostles' teaching. So the Bible's in 4 parts. Reading another book by Larry Hurtado, I can't remember which book it was at the time, which is where I saw in one of the footnotes that Marcion was effectively responsible for introducing the headings, the New Testament and Old Testament.
That's amazing, because he's the classic one who didn't want anything Jewish in the Bible.
Of course, he was removing anything Jewish and restricting the canon of the New Testament Church. But that mindset has continued, and Tertullian, who was an early church father who argued against it, but they still adopted these terms, New Testament and Old Testament. So the first thing is we mix up Testament and Covenant.
Yeah.
Covenant is different because the sacrifice happens at the beginning. Testament is like the will and testament. It happens when you die. So whereas the covenant is where you make a covenant and you're looking at the animals that have been sacrificed, thinking, well, look, if I get it wrong, if I break the covenant.
Yeah.
Ultimately, Jesus takes that punishment upon himself. But seeing the Bible as a series of covenants unfolding, all of which, actually, to some degree, there's some older ones and there's the newer one, but they are not all old, because one of them's with Noah, which we wouldn't be here today without. While the earth remains, never shall seed time and harvest fail. Coming back to the scripture and the order of the Bible, that's really essential. And actually, all then the chronological books of the Bible are in chronological order. So that's most interesting, because in the Hebrew order, you've got the 5 books of Moses, which sets out the parameters, the legal and historical. Then you come to the prophets, which are really the historical and the oracle. So up until Kings, it's all historical. The oracle are then coming back with Isaiah linking to Hezekiah, Jeremiah to Josiah, and then you've got the final 12 at the bottom, which are seen as one book in Hebrew. So in fact, it's 24 books in the Hebrew Bible, which fit the alphabet of the Hebrew alphabet, which is 22 plus 2 endings of different words, different letters. But then, so that's really then, having done the prophets, which are the historical and the oracle, they're actually looking at the progress that's made, and it ends with this 12, the last 3 of which are post-exile. So that is in chronological order even to there. Then you come to the Psalms, which is in 5 books like the 5 books of Moses, and actually there you're processing. So it's the poetical and historical, including some Proverbs books in there as well. And then it ends with the historical books of Esther and Daniel together, which are very usefully sit next to each other. Ezra, Nehemiah, and then Chronicles as a summary book at the end, which summarizes what you've gone through up until then. So you're reprocessed. Chronicles repeats so much of what goes before, including all the covenants are in there. And then drawing through to the genealogy of ultimately David, but linking through to what would become the genealogy of Jesus. In the final part, we're now into the apostles' teaching.
Just
and
breaking you there, because which is really important.
Going on, but then you've got Matthew, which starts with the genealogy.
I want to hear that.
Yeah.
It's only just to give a bit of variety. Otherwise, as I say, I could listen to you all night on this, because it's so important.
Yes.
I mean, the Lord said to the men on the road to Emmaus, how foolish you are not to believe all the prophets have spoken. Then starting with Moses, he said.
That's right.
And all the prophets.
He then said what was about him, but he
Yes.
didn't at that point have to tell them what wasn't about him.
Yeah.
So he says how foolish you are not to believe all of what the prophet said.
Yes.
So they understood the bit about the kingdom coming to Israel at some point. What they misunderstood was the suffering servant. So it wasn't that they didn't understand some, it was the all bit, which then Jesus had to emphasize.
Funnily enough,
at that
people,
point.
evangelicals today, would understand the suffering servant, but they'd miss all the other stuff.
Well, exactly right. So what actually happens is, because we are, in the 5th season, you could say, there's 4 seasons, as it were, of the Bible which unfold like the seasons like the crown. We're in the 5th season, some way down the road. So we're kind of trying to read back, and we see the Christian focuses very much on what we call the New Testament or the Apostles' teaching. The Orthodox Jews focus very much on the law, and they fail to see the journey that goes on. And actually the logical progression by the time you come to the end of Chronicles is that they are looking for both a king and they're making their way up to Jerusalem, to the land. So you've got the line and the land, which then continues on into Matthew, where the first mention is about the people, Israel my people. The second mention is about Israel the land.
Yeah, that is really, really interesting.
Just
keep going.
Tracking on a little bit further.
I want to. Now we're talking about, we're not talking about the New Testament, we're talking about the Apostles' teaching.
The Apostles' teaching is what the early church gave themselves to. Why didn't they say we gave ourselves to Jesus' teaching? Because he'd entrusted it to them to write the final story. And there's a particular instance, I won't go into it now because probably haven't got time, when we're at the Mount of Transfiguration. It only takes 3 disciples with him. He's just appointed them as apostles, but he only takes 3, and he's already talked about being in the mouth of 2 and 3 witnesses. So he took those 3 to witness this occasion where you've got Moses representing the law, Elijah representing the prophets, Jesus representing the Psalms, and the apostles represent the apostles. Of course, Jesus is all four, because you
Yeah.
talk about priest and apostle, and you talk about Jesus as a prophet. He's also the lawgiver. And of course, he's from the tribe of Judah. He actually sang a psalm, created a psalm in the New Testament. When the 72 or the 70, we went out by, 2 by 2, the 70
correct.
went out. And he said, I praise and thank you, O God.
Yeah.
But coming back to following the same logic through, just quickly,
Yeah, go.
you've got Matthew, Mark and Luke, which work very well that order, but Luke and Acts are split up by John's Gospel. And actually Luke and Acts were written together. They're 2 volumes of almost the same book. So what I do, using the idea from Chronicles, and I'm not the only person to see this, but some people would say John should be at the beginning of the Gospels. But actually, John is a very interesting one because it's like a summary book like Chronicles. In fact, it's a summary book of all the 4 parts of the Bible by that stage, because it begins, in the beginning was the Word. At the end of John, there's a very interesting extra chapter, which is totally tied in, and Richard Borkham in Jesus and the Eyewitnesses shows this by the way the words are and how it ends 20 and how it ends 21. But in there, Peter is walking with Jesus, the other disciple is behind him, and he says, well, what about him? And what Jesus says to Peter is, what is that to you if I want him to remain until I come? So then, like with Chronicles, you've got the beginning of the story and the second coming.
Yeah.
So John sits much better next to Revelation. I've moved Jude next to James, because they were brothers, and then John and Peter sit nicely together. And of course, Peter, in his second letter, he says, we didn't make these things up, we were there, we saw them, because they weren't even to tell what they were supposed to do about the transfiguration to the other disciples. But they could tell it at that point.
Now, that's absolutely fantastic. I'm so pleased that we covered it, Jake, because I hope people can be as excited as I was when I first heard it. Now, what I want to hear in our last 5 minutes, believe it or not, is what bearing does that have on people's understanding of the teachings, let's say, that God hasn't finished with the Jewish people, and replacement theology. Where does that framework help in this regard?
Okay, well, first of all, I should say that I've now got a reading plan which works for the whole year in that structure, and that's in the centrefold of the booklet, which CFI have a series of booklets called Christian Friends of Israel, called Israel in Context. So it's a context series. It's called Covenant Steps, God's Bigger Picture.
Great.
So that's the first thing.
Great.
So
and they can get that from CFI. UK.org.
That's correct.
Great. Carry on.
From the bookshop
That's
there.
Great.
So basically what happens in terms of our replacement thinking, there are 4 different, I've 3 are the main ones, but I've added a 4th one if I can quickly do it. But the first one is structurally how we read the Bible. In the evangelical world, one, it's very much about personal salvation rather than the corporate element of it. But in the evangelical world, we start with Genesis 1, creation. We then go to Genesis 3, the fall, and then we jump to Matthew 1, redemption. We miss out everything in between. The antidote to that is to see the consummation and then God's correction over that period. So it helps me, probably because Dad was ordained into the Baptist Church, using alliteration, if you don't mind. But basically, the big picture is the one we've got to see, going from creation to completion or consummation. But you go via corruption, and then correction. There's all of those words are significant within the Bible. God's always correcting the corruption, and he does that with covenants. He started it with what he could call a proto-covenant with Adam, the covenant of clothing, sacrifice of an animal, and so on. Then he goes on to Noah, which is the covenant of the cloud. Then we run on to Abraham, which is so significant, which is the child and the country. Those promises run right through the scriptures. They're emphasized heavier or more others, but they're right through, even in the final book of the Bible. In fact, just quickly, in Hebrews, Abraham's faith is recognized as righteous both on the land and the line, as it were, or the child and the country. Coming next is an interesting one, is Moses, and that's the covenant of the commemoration. And what that does is, we always think of Moses' commands, but actually it's more important the commemoration, because that's the day that Jeremiah refers to, and that's the day that Jesus calls the New Covenant. So new and old are those two. I won't go into any more of that. But that's looking at the structural picture. There are others as well.
No, that's great. are people listening? So we've got 2 minutes, Jake, and it's absolutely brilliant that we've encapsulated this in the program. I didn't know where we were going to go with it, but it's fantastic. Now, how is that received, or are people just indifferent because they've got this sort of 3-point plan?
I think it's a challenge. People are seeing it, but they're not. They just need to turn that dial a little bit clearer to see more clearly, which is one of our strap lines. So we're seeing.
Do they feel threatened? They feel threatened by this. They feel threatened by the whole weight of Jewish teachings. What is it within the evangelical world that needs unlocking?
I think the fact is that you've got to, with all of these things, you've got to look for the good within these, even in some of the church fathers. Yeah. Some of their understanding of the order of the Bible was actually correct. Others then emphasised the New Testament and Old Testament. So, which is also slightly, I've got a few quotes in there, but it says, the readings from the apostles and also the memoirs of the apostles or the prophets were made. Yeah. So they were already using those terms and the Bible uses them. So is it effective? When I speak on a one-to-one basis at Christian festivals, one of the things we try and do to encourage understanding, very good. Yeah. Trying to move it into the theological, there's some good writers out there now in the theological colleges, and that's another area where we need to.
So all I can say is, Jay, we're in the last 30 seconds, can you believe? We rattled a lot, and I hope people really dig into this. Yeah. You're building relationships, and you're a Christian, so you're basing your arguments on the scriptures and trying to sort of reach out to the wider church.
Yes, and I think even if we think better, then that will help us. So it's not, I'm only starting people on the journey in one sense, because we can't change, 2,000 years of millennia of misunderstanding, but actually, when we get there, it's faith enhancing, which is actually the name of our magazine.
Bless you, Jake. I've really, really enjoyed that. Jacob Vince, CEO of Christian Friends of Israel UK. Very thorough. Bless you. And thank you for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you the next time we go face to face.